Okay, the first seam that we're going to make is what we call a plain seam. This is the most basic seam that you use when you construct most of the garments or other projects that you're going to make. So we're going to use our seam and seam finishes piece number 29 to make this seam. So when we take our pattern piece off, we should have 2 pieces of fabric. When we put this seam together, we are going to do what's called a superimpose seam, which means that we're going to lay the pieces of fabric one on top of each other. As we do that, we want to put right sides together. So remember that the right side is the side that's going to have the dominant or the really strong pattern on it. It's going to be the side that you're going to want to see when you look at the finished garment from the outside. The wrong side is going to be the side of the fabric that has the lesser of the patterns with it, so it's not as strong as the back side of the garment. So we want to put right side up on the piece that's going to be down on the table. We're going to flip the other one over so that the right sides are together and the wrong sides are on the outside. When we do that, we also want to line the edge of the pattern pieces or the fabric pieces up so that the edges are smooth. We're going to put a couple pins in here to hold those pieces of fabric together as we sew. When you put your pins, you want to put them at a 90-degree angle from where we're going to actually sew. So we're going to be sewing this way, so our pins are going to run this way. Your machine should be able to sew over the pins if you go slow enough, but you can always put your pins in so that you can easily remove them as you're sewing if you prefer to take them out as you sew. So now we're ready to actually sew. So as we sew, when we make a seam with most projects that we make, the seam allowance that we're going to want is 5/8 of an inch. So if you look at your throat plate, you have some measurements that are marked there. So you want to make sure that the edge of your fabric is at the 5/8 of an inch. You want to also then, as we're placing it in there, to leave a little bit of the fabric behind the needle because we're going to want to do what's called backstitching. Backstitching is going to actually hold our stitches tight so that they don't unravel as we wear and use our products that we're making. So once you get it lined up, you're going to lower your presser foot. There should be a lever, usually on the inside of your machine, that you lower down and it lowers your presser foot. You can raise it up and it'll raise your presser foot. Okay, so we want our presser foot low. Now with a plain stitch, we're going to use what's called a regular stitch length. So on your machines, most machines have a dial that sets your stitch length. So in the middle is what we call our regular stitch length, which is what we sew most of our stitches with. As we go up in numbers, the stitches get longer and further apart. And we use those for basting and for temporary stitches that we want to be able to pull out. Also, as we have heavier fabrics, we'll want to use longer stitch lengths. You can also go down and make your stitch lengths tighter. This would be if you have a very fine, very slippery fabric, very lightweight fabric. Sometimes we want our stitches tighter, but we want to have our stitches in the middle, or what we call a regular stitch length. Then we're ready to begin sewing. And the first thing we're going to do is backstitch. So most machines have a button where you can backstitch. Some machines you just press the button and it puts it in backstitch mode. Some machines you actually have to hold the button down while you're backstitching. So once you press your button, then you're going to actually backstitch. Your machine will go backwards on its own. You're going to go a couple stitches back to the edge of the fabric. Then you're going to press your button again or just release it so that it's ready to go in the forward position. Now we're going to sew down the length of our fabric at 5/8 of an inch. As you're sewing, you want to make sure that the edge of your fabric is staying at the 5/8 inch seam allowance guide. As you get close to the edge of your fabric, you can use your hand wheel that's on the side of your machine, rotating it towards you to actually hand stitch to the edge of the fabric so that you don't go over. Once you get to the edge of the fabric, you're going to want to again back stitch for 2 to 3 stitches to hold our seam in place. Okay. Once you're done with that, we're going to be ready to remove our fabric from the machine. Remember, we want to make sure that our take-up lever is always at the height or the up position, so that our needle is in the up position, so that as we pull our thread out, we don't unthread our machine the next time we start. Then you're ready to cut your threads. Once we finish sewing, then we need to iron or press our seam allowances open. So you're going to take your fabric, open it up, and you're going to open your seam allowances so that they open flat. Take your iron and iron that seam allowance flat. And then I like to also flip it over and just make sure that it's nice and smooth on the outside as well. Kind of pushing the iron back and forth to make sure that you get it nice and flat. And I have my iron set on a high temperature because I actually have cotton fabric, but your iron will have different temperatures based on your fabric content, and you want to make sure that you have it set according to what fiber content you're sewing with, because if you have it set too high, you can melt your fabric.